All right, welcome to today's live stream. So I've got a 12 by 16 inch gesso panel, and I'm going to be doing a winter sunset study today. I'm using oil paints, and of course the colors I've streamed live with the channel members prior to the stream here. And we're just doing a nice snow-covered study as I begin my workday. And I'm beginning with just some burnt sienna, thinned down a lot so that I can sketch out my composition. The reference that I'm using today is, as always, my own, and I share those reference photos with the channel members as well. So, just looking for composition at this point. And by using the burnt sienna like this, just allows me to work out my idea, and I can make changes if I want. We're going to have a beautiful sun just kind of emerging from right here. I should have a link to all the materials that I use in the description below as well, if you're interested in that. We had some nice snowfall again yesterday, so it just kind of got me back in the mood. Paint some winter before it's gone. Hello everybody in the live chat. It's great to see you all. Hope you're having a wonderful morning, evening, wherever you are, afternoon. So as I'm working on the composition, I'm not worried about value. I just want to know where everything's going to be and get that worked out. And it's helpful sometimes to not be shy, and if there are areas that are not going to be part of the highlights, to just get some of the color on there. It just kind of helps me solidify the composition and the idea of just where everything is in my mind. Kind of consider this part sketching. I used to sketch right onto the canvas or panel, but over time that just kind of enjoy this process more so. Allows me to just kind of work freely on the canvas, and it's really easy to change course. I often use the makeup wedges to kind of scrub away what I've got here. Because I've got this thinned down so much, it is very easily removed or altered. yeah, again, hello everybody. I'll get into some Q&A if you're in the live chat a little bit later in the process, like I typically do. So I'm just looking for indications and trying to make impressions of different things that I see. Nothing has to be precise at this point. I just want to know what I'm doing. So, there's one good example. Just got a makeup wedge here. And just dip it in a little bit of thinner, and I can just kind of look at some marks I made. And again, none of this is going to be exact, but it just kind of helps me to continue working the composition and the structure of everything. Got some big old pine trees up here, tops of them. And then the sun is going to peek through somewhere right in this area. A little bit of mountains drifting in the background. Be very subtle. One question in the live chat, was I a wildlife photographer? No, I was not. No, pretty amateur photographer. I was a wildlife biologist, technician, whatever you want to call it. Did get my degree in wildlife. Photography has always just been something I love to do, to capture the moment. Help me use that later in my process. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there. Bear with me. Might not look like much, but every little indication kind of helps me. Just every hard line kind of be a mess, but it all just kind of helps me make sure I know where things are going to be. Having a plan is very important. Any wildlife in this painting? That's a good question. Maybe. I definitely am thinking about it. If I do, it's probably going to be a later point in the process. I haven't really planned on that specifically, although I was looking at some of the wildlife reference that I've captured with my camera, and I was thinking about doing some of these studies that I do as I start my day. I was thinking about doing some wildlife specific paintings and studies. They're always helpful. Do some portraits perhaps. Okay, so I'm happy with that, and I'm going to wash the brush. So the colors in general, I started with titanium white, quinacridone magenta, cad yellow, light, cad orange, burnt sienna, and ultramarine blue. And then these are the tones that I mix with that. So I believe I have my colors just right here on the outside, pure colors. And then these are the colors that I pre-mixed with those channel members. So I'm going to start with some blue up in the sky. And there's some trees protruding into the sky, so I'm going to kind of think about some negative space and where that's going to exist and where the trees are going to be. Try to go around where I think those trees will end up. So it's a nice soft brush, kind of an angled flat brush. This one's called the Fox Squirrel by Dynasty. I started using them recently. It's been a nice brush for blending. And even though they're square, you get some really nice smooth blends out of it. And as I get closer to area of the sun, gonna get a lot brighter. So I don't want a lot of color as I'm mixing between some of these light areas and some of these more blue tones, because I can get green looking pretty fast. So I want to keep it fairly neutral, and if anything it should be more towards the red spectrum, magenta. You can even take a little magenta and add that. Keep it nice and warm without getting yellow. I do prefer oil painting to acrylics. More so lately, it's just been a more interesting process for me. I feel like I have a lot to learn with with oils, and that interests me, intrigues me. just enjoy the workability of oils and how long they stay wet. It's something I've been enjoying a lot. But not to say that you could not do a gorgeous painting with acrylics either. Alright, I'm going to just wash my brush real quick. And I'm going to add some orange to that. Kind of some white and orange. I'm just going to go ahead and leave the rest of the sky for the time being. And I'm going to wash off my brush. I'm going to take this black, this is burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, and pick up some of this color that has more magenta in it. Maybe some of this color here that has got kind of some dark green to it. So I don't want a pure black. I want to just tone that back a little bit. Just lift it up. And I'm going to start anchoring in a couple spots here. And I'm going to keep the paint thin for now, because I want to be able to layer on top. It kind of helps me do so. I'm thinking about where are those darker areas. Just want to get those established. Never used oil pastels, no. Do you ever use acrylic? I used acrylic for many years. I think I've got a lot of videos on acrylics and some of the tips that I've shared. Okay, so as I think about this, what I'd actually like to do is kind of forget about, so we're going to have some snow-covered trees here, but before I do that, I'm going to keep the paint thin, and I'm going to go ahead and just go right over the top of where the stuff will be. Try to maintain some of the things that I have established, but I can layer over the top, and I think that's kind of the approach I'm going to take with this one. So as I work on this stuff, I'm always looking for just new ways to kind of think about my process and how to go about that. So I'm going to try this. Something I don't often do, but just kind of ignore some of the details here and just go right into some of the underlying colors. And so we're going to have the sun glowing through here. So we've got some magenta, orange, burnt sienna, kind of create this nice warm red mix. And this is a darker version of that. And we're just gonna fill it right in. So keeping the paint nice and thin, and it's just going to allow me to layer over the top. And I think this will be an easy approach. It's a very complicated composition on some of these trees with the snow, and a lot of times it's much easier to avoid the difficulty of trying to structure all of that properly and just kind of block things in and be able to go back in later. Just go over the top with those details. It's just sometimes easier than trying to go around everything. So then I'm just going to lightly dust some of these areas that I know are going to have snow. Alright, and then in the same way on the other side, it's going to be this yellow and white, kind of this nice orange color, and then we've got more of a golden color down here. Kind of mix some of those together, test that out, kind of like that. Yeah, I take all my own photos, and the reference photos I share with the channel memberships. So I've got about maybe 18 or 20 different photos from this day. It was a hike I took nearby where we live. Just some beautiful colors. So again, we're just go ahead and just cover. I'm looking for areas which I think will be kind of underneath all the highlights, the insides of all the pine trees. Just trying to get coverage right now. A lot of these areas will be darker when I'm done, but it just helps me to get a good head start. And I'll probably wait to add the darks once I get the highlights established. So I think it's going to be cool. It's going to just sort of start appearing as I go. It should make sense as I go as well. Just looking for coverage right now, and the reason I'm kind of bouncing around like this is I'm paying attention to the details of what I want without actually committing myself to some of those details. So I am trying to give the impression of some of these details as I work. Hence the sporadic motion, just kind of thinking about different things and trying to get the indication of that on there. Nice golden yellow. Yeah, we're gonna have a tree right here, just nice and illuminated. As I get into those darks, this is just kind of a darker version of that. Again, I think for this purpose, coverage is most important. And it's kind of the same way I go about things on a large painting. However, with the large paintings, I'll just kind of section off the paintings rather than trying to get coverage on the whole painting overall. I'll go a little more in depth with the burnt sienna in the beginning just to get all of the values and composition established, and then I kind of section the painting off into pieces. I don't really like to go after it all at once. I really like to work the paint wet on wet before it dries in each area, and if I can, I'd prefer to finish it in one layer. Now, that's oftentimes not always possible. We have some great big pines around our house, and the crows nest everywhere in our neighborhood, and they just showed up. Hence all the crow calls in the background, if you can hear that. Okay. So again, very thin. It's almost like a wash going on. Even these areas that are kind of confusing, just like to go ahead and just get something on there in the same way that I kind of did in the beginning with the burnt sienna. Just scrub color on, get it on there. Can all be covered up, and that nice warmth, some of it might just kind of remain and show through, but some of these nice warm scrubs of color can end up working in your favor in the end. Okay, I'll wash the brush. Alright, and I think I'm going to kind of switch to some blue again. kind of a blue-gray, ultramarine blue, a little burnt sienna, and then some white. Kind of gives you these nice bluish tones. Again, and even I find myself caught up in this, is just try to get all of it covered as you work through this first pass. Whenever you're working on a painting, I often get tied up in some of the details as well. It's something I need to work on as well. That's why I like doing these studies. Finishing something is a lot different than working on something, and when you kind of finish something, you feel like you can take more away. With the last live stream, one thing that I thought about, this often kind of comes to me later in time, is what lessons I can take away from that painting. And one of the things that, and I still want to go back and touch it up, that I wasn't satisfied and I think I could improve on as I move forward, was getting more of my darks established earlier on in the process, because a lot of times, not that you're not aware of the darks and you're not making an effort towards them, but it just becomes difficult to keep things dark when you've already got a different color on the painting. So I do think it is good advice to get the darker areas more established earlier on in the process than later. Again, just lightly scrubbing, not a lot of color on the brush as I continue to work. Just want coverage. I want this to feel like the color is sketched out appropriately and that I can envision it before I get into the thicker paint applications, the details. Common question I get is, how do I keep my colors from getting muddy, especially when I'm applying like this and I'm working all with wet paint, kind of one sitting. How do you keep working without things just totally becoming mud? And I really think that's the consistency of the paint. It comes down to how sticky the paint is or how runny it is. That's kind of why I moved away from the Liquid Original, just because it's more fluid, and I seem to run into difficulties more often with mediums that are more fluid like that, and I would rather add a little less medium and focus more on thinning it down with the thinner if I have to. So the same thing goes with around the area of the sun. It doesn't have to be what I'm stuck with, whatever I apply right now. It's just kind of, it will get brighter as I can add thicker paint, some pure white later in the process, so it might not be as bright as I want it to be, but I can adjust that as I go. Yeah, I do have a shop towel, and that lasts for quite a long time. I'm not a fan of the paper towels. But I do dab it off when you hear me kind of wash the brush like so. I will dab it off in the shop towel, and the shop towel is good for just when you have a clean brush, it soaks up the thinner, and then you can kind of reuse that shop towel for quite a long time. Alright, so I am going to start thinking a little more specifically about some of the colors I'm laying down in the sky. I'm going to try real quick, just taking this is a larger version of the brush that I'm using, and just, it's a dry brush, and just kind of smooth out some of that I just added to the sky. Just up top. Get that nice and smooth. I do like that. I feel like I'm happy with the top end of the sky. These work as great dry brushes. Anything that has good volume of hairs on your brush and is relatively soft, has some good bounce to it, makes for a good brush for blending. Alright. I'm going to pick up some of this yellow and white. And some pure ultramarine blue, a little more of this yellow, which is just white and cad yellow. Get more of a turquoise feel. Pick up some of that darker blue. It kind of helps me blend that in. Hey, thank you, Chris, so much. I always appreciate it. Have you ever done a landscape that is a super messy and styled, like the block-in stage or impressionistic? Yeah, I used to do a number of those. I think I grew out of it personally. I felt like I just couldn't find my voice in it. It is how I felt, if I'm being honest. I can really appreciate an artist that can do impressionism very well and can articulate that well in their brush strokes. And I definitely strive to have some of those aspects in my work and try to communicate a certain thing. But I have done paintings like that. I just never thought that I had the talent in that specific area. I've loosened up over time for sure in how I communicate my brush strokes, but maybe if I reapproach that now, I would think differently. Okay, so kind of just added some light peachy orange through here. And on the top of it, got some distant clouds. And the top of it has got a nice warm golden glow. And those colors can kind of just be brought over into this part of the sky. So I really want to get the sky feeling like I have it before I move on. Yeah, do I use this big blender brush to blend out reflections in the water? Yeah, I would, and I feel like I probably have, but it's a good brush for that. So very light pressure on my brush right now, just barely scraping the canvas with it. Pressure of your brush dictates so much of how things come out. Some more of this yellow. And pick up a little bit of the orange with that yellow. Looking on the outside of, I want that sun to kind of be sitting down in here. So on the outer edge of that, I want some color. Pick up some of that magenta and the yellow. What is the time now in my country? 10 in the morning. Beautiful morning outside. The sun is shining. Birds are going nuts. I think the season is here. A little more of that color. So I'm going to just attempt to blend some of this out. So I'm going sideways, and you can see it doesn't mesh very well as I paint side to side like this, but then if I kind of bring it the other direction, it really starts to fan out and smooth out nicely. I like that. Let's stick with that. I think more of this could be adjusted as I get further into the process. So let's just go ahead and do that. Get a little bit further on with some of the things we're after. just make sure that I get all of the sky in place where I want it, at least up here. Okay. Wash my brush off. Now I feel like here comes the more fun part. So I'm going to start thinking about, let's start thinking about some of the trees and the snow. This is really where things are going to start to come together. Before I get to the snow, I get a little more brightness right around the sun itself. So mixing some orange, some yellow, and some white, and just going to brighten up some of these pine boughs that are kind of just protruding into the light. More orange. So we're just focused on the brightness of the sun. I'm focused on the color. The rest can come after that. It's difficult to add this in, I feel like, prior to. It's difficult to add this on after the fact of adding all the details, the snow, the pine boughs, and so I like to get this on beforehand. Again, these colors that you see in the trees, they're really what's underneath. What's behind all the highlights and the details up front, the snow on the pine boughs. And as always, right on cue, the street sweeper comes by. So, as I work up into some of the upper parts of these trees, I think before detail, what's important is getting the outlines, before changing colors and going darker, getting some of the outlines, what's going to be protruding into the sky, getting all that established just kind of keeps things nice and clean. It's really before I've added the detail, or I'm sorry, before I added some of the thicker applications of paint, so things are easily changed. They're easily scrubbed into one another without too much commitment. And I think it's just good practice with your trees. Feel like you've got everything nailed down before you get to the thicker paint. So this is what I would consider like a blocked in painting. And when you're painting more alla prima in one layer, one sitting like this, It's wet and I'll continue to work it. But if I was working with acrylics, I feel like this is kind of what I would be doing. And then of course this would be drying, and then I would just proceed over the top of that, dry on wet. So again, just want to get some of those shapes and patterns. Kind of use the skinny side of the brush and the point of it, and as you push in, kind of create some nice square rectangular patterns. So just not being lazy with some of the trees and the details protruding in the sky. I really want to get into some of the rest of this, but I'm just trying to be patient with that. Just trusting the process of getting things established. Brighten this up. We got a tree sticking way up right here. Oh wow, thank you. I'm gonna botch this name. Srinivasan? I'm sorry if I can't pronounce your name. Can you mention the artists that inspire you also for this painting? Are you using any medium? Thank you so much for the super chat. It really means a lot to me. Thank you. The medium I'm using in the painting right now is just some liquid in pasto. I usually shoot for around anywhere from 10 to 20%, and it's not necessarily exactly measured every time. Probably 15+% in the mixture right now, and then I use Gamsol paint thinner to thin it down, and I like to thin it down to the point where it feels very soft and malleable. Some of the peaks will curl over and they won't stick up so straight, so I like to add a consistent amount of medium, and then if I need them more thinned down, I'll add more thinner to that. And as far as like who inspires me for artists, I mean, there's so many artists today that inspire me, just their work ethic, everything that they do. I'm always inspired, of course, by just people that are working today, but I think where I got most of my inspiration through different other artists was when I was a kid, and growing up in the Midwest, in Minnesota. Of course, the big Minnesota artists when I was a kid were Terry Redlin, which South Dakota, Minnesota, kind of the same thing. I think he taught at the University of Minnesota, actually, but Terry Redlin was just everywhere when I was a kid. And then the other three were the Hauptman brothers. Jim, Robert, Jim, Joe, and Bob. And they just do brilliant wildlife work, all with acrylics. And of course, Terry Redlin painted the scenes of the early 20th century and in life in the Midwest, and the stories that he had as a kid, and he really captured what Midwest life was all about, and that really inspired me as a kid, because I, of course, just loving the outdoors, everything that those artists did just captured what I loved so much. And whenever I was not outside, it's just all I could think about. And that's where I feel like I discovered artwork was when I was, maybe in school or couldn't be outside for whatever reason. That kept me in the realm of the outdoors, just drawing a picture of a deer or anything like that. Just it kept my mind on it and kept me inspired, and that's really how I feel like I discovered art. And those artists were so impactful when I was a kid, and not necessarily what it was, but how they told stories. And so yeah, so many good artists out there, though. It really is. But I can really connect with somebody who loves to tell stories and in ways that I like to experience when I'm outside. And that's hopefully what I try to convey with my work, and try to connect with people who share those similar loves for nature and being outside. And for me, it doesn't really matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter if it looks like a photograph or it doesn't look like a photograph. If it's painterly, if it's beautifully executed, the story is what I am passionate about. And I think so many artists do a good job with that, regardless of how the painting looks in the end. And I think that's where the painting really has less to do. A good painting has less to do with how it looks and how it's executed, and more to do with how you connected with it as you created it, and the story that you told, and other people that can connect with that. And that's really what art is, why it's important to me. Okay, so all this is looking good. I really like what I have here so far. And I'm ready to get into the fun part. A lot of the stuff can be adjusted. Just kind of an indication of a ridge back there. Okay, so I'm going to wash the brush. And yeah, I think we're ready to dive in. So I'm going to think about the snow here. And I think that yeah, I think I'm going to stick with what I have right here. Just fine-tuning some of this. And this is going to go on a little bit more thick. So let's just start, perhaps. Oof, it might be too bright. So a lot of this, I think, is just going to kind of blend together, flow together. I appreciate it, Rob. Thank you for the super chat. Really means a lot to me. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're having a good morning. So this is a very complicated composition of snow. And I think I'm going to go for the more major areas of where the snow exists. And the reference photo that I have, that I took, it does not have to match that whatsoever, but I do want the large areas to be present and try to maintain composition just for myself and my own process and thinking. Wow, thank you again. Yes, no problem for the response. I appreciate the super chat again. Learning to paint from watching your videos. You have a nice day and a wonderful weekend ahead. Same to you. Thank you. So because I kept my paint my initial layer here on the thin side, this paint just easily stacks right up on top. And before I get ahead of myself and continue up, I'm going to go from the other side now, and that kind of keeps me in check of where I'm putting things and how I'm doing that. So sometimes you can get ahead of yourself pretty easily, and I'm definitely somebody who does that. So I'm going to go back over the top up here and work my way back down. And what's great about the warm colors that I added is if that kind of blends into what I'm doing now, that it'll create just a nice warmth to this overall, so I'm not too worried about that. I feel like this is one of the most enjoyable parts of the process because it's just so relaxing, and these pine boughs and the way the snow sits on them can really just be any way. It can change by the day, it can change by the snowstorm, by the amount of snow. So I feel like there's no wrong way to go about this and where you put it. Kind of continue trying to keep myself in check. So we got the sunlight here, and pick up some white. This will be a little more bright and warm. flat brush can create a lot of different textures. Really can accomplish a lot with it. Just go slow, take your time with it. Use the back side, the front side. Kind of just using the back of it right now. And I feel like the angle, when you have an angled brush like this versus a flat one, you just provide just more diverse brush strokes in the way that you can rotate it, just making it just the angle just provides more ways to make a unique brush stroke, being that it's not symmetrical, it's asymmetrical. And so again, I feel like I'm going to add a lot more detail to some of these areas, but I'm not going into that yet. I want to get across and feel comfortable with what I have overall before I get too ahead of myself. The music I'm listening to, that is it's from a paid service, Epidemic Sound. I can't have other music on my videos here. That's a good question though. I should start creating a list, but they're music artists who have licensed their work to these services, which then people like myself can use on the videos with a subscription. But I'll look into that. I'll try to do a better job in listing the music that I play. I am gonna look for some different types as well, but just something subtle in the background. But I think you could browse Epidemic Sound for free and just see all the artists that are on there. A lot of good music can be found there. All right. So now, kind of in the opposite direction here. Come back. Well, you know what? I'm going to mix a darker blue. Go back to this darker shade, and I'm going to kind of go back from this side. Thank you, look great. Have you done commission paintings? If so, do you find them satisfying, or do you feel like it keeps you from doing what you really love? I have done a lot of commission work, So when I really got started selling my work back probably around 17, 18, 19 years old, that's just kind of the natural progression. I think for a lot of people it is doing commission work, and I think I've done well into the hundreds and hundreds of pet portraits, and I did that for a long time. And I think over the years, however, I started discovering what I really want to accomplish with my own work, and that's something that I feel like I didn't know as well earlier in the years, of perhaps the answer to why I wanted to create art and why I wanted to do what it was I wanted to do, or even what that was. And as I progressed through the years, and I started learning more about myself as an artist and identifying what it is I was trying to accomplish as a creator, I think that's when custom work became more difficult for me, because that's kind of the time when, as an artist, you really develop a passion and a fire inside for, what it is you're after. And of course, you can't accomplish that by painting commission work. It's just really hard to do, to get it to coincide with the vision that you're trying to acquire and trying to achieve with your work. And so I think just over the years, so no, I do not do commission work any longer, and I just think it's more so because, not that I didn't like to do it, but as I learned about myself and what it is I wanted to do, that just kind of became hard, because I ran out of time to do both. And so that's kind of how I answered that question for myself. Moving away from commission work was just really asking myself some tough questions, and what it is I want to accomplish as an artist. And it just takes a lot of time. And so I feel very fortunate to be able to move away from custom work and focus on kind of my own path. I know that's a difficult thing to do for a lot of artists, and I think commission work is a great way, though, to give yourself time and answer those questions for yourself if you feel like you don't have that answer yet. And it feels wonderful to provide a painting that people consider an heirloom to the family or what have you. And I highly encourage commission work if that helps you get to where you need to be as an artist. And sometimes you don't need to know the answer of what that is and where you're going, but it comes with time. Alright, so slowly but surely some of these things are coming into view, and you can start to see what's taken shape. I'm just going to keep carefully executing this. It's easily rushed, I think, especially just some of these pine boughs can just not that I couldn't change it, and not that I won't change it as I keep moving with the process here, but some of them can kind of get out of hand, and I think it saves more time in the long run by taking your time and really paying attention to each brush stroke and making sure it's what you want before you make it. And thicker paint can always be added up over the top, and I might do that as I get further into the process. But the composition of each pine bough, that's kind of what I'm paying attention to more so than the color. The angle. So I'm adding more white as I get closer to the sun, of course, just to play into that feeling of light through here. Yeah, that's a common question I get. Am I entering the duck stamp this year? Still pending. I need to get out to the marsh and see if I can get some photographs of some of the eligible species. We'll see. Possibly. It's one of those things that can be a fun thing to do, but if you don't have the right resources ahead of time, can end up being very frustrating, as I'm sure some of you know if you've tried to compete in that. So anymore, I really like to make sure that the homework that I try to do for it, that it comes out exactly how I need it to, or else I typically sit it out if I can't get the right photos and feel like I'm confident in what I want to do. It takes a lot of time. Props to the folks who can do it every year and do it well. And it's a little more difficult for me. I don't have access to the marsh quite so readily where I live. Gotta drive a good distance to get some of the quality wetlands and be able to get photos of ducks. Okay. So overall, I feel like I've got a good idea at least of this whole area and where that all that snow is going to sit. So I am going to get a little bit more involved with some of the snow and try to fill in some of the areas I left. I want to go a bit darker. Again, I want to maintain that flow from light to dark as I get further away from the sun. I don't want the snow to be too bright back here. I'm going to stick with this brush, and I probably will switch to my favorite dagger brush a little bit here. Lots of small details I want to try and capture. Just get those in there. Some of it can be found in the reference that I'm using, and some can just kind of be made up. Going better this time. That's awesome to hear. Yeah, that last painting, Luke, was a tough painting. I still am going to approach that again. Trees are so much, again, to me, they're so much more relaxing. A tree can grow any which way. If it gets damaged, it'll alter its growth. There's just so many possibilities, and as long as you have kind of that structure of how they grow figured out, you can really no mistakes. And you'll see as I continue to work, some of the lighter color snow, I can just take the darker color and just add it right back over the top. And darken areas if I need to. Been watching your videos for years. It's amazing how confident you've become in your color choices and color theory. Thank you, James. Appreciate that. Steve, love the way you do with light. It really makes the biggest difference to composition. Thank you, Steve. Always appreciated. Thank you for your answer. I just started painting and did my first commission painting, but during that time I was doing it, I was thinking about a project I couldn't work on because of it. Yeah, commission work are a difficult thing. I think you have to be in the right place in your journey as an artist, and it's a tough thing to answer. I'll say that. So if you're ever working on something like this, I think you really got to, separate yourself from any reference you're using, and when it gets complicated like this, really start thinking about the individual trees. What is it that I'm working on, and how would that look? Where am I painting the boughs appropriately on each side of the tree? I'm trying to envision single trees as I go, and trying to attach whatever it is I'm adding to the idea of where that tree is. Let's get the tops of these figured out. Just a little bit of snow. Wash my brush again. And I'm gonna pick up some brighter color white again here. And just try to wrap up some of the area around the sun. For right now, I'm going to step away from that part, and I'm going to think about some of these brighter patches that are going to exist on this big tree right here. So got some more color over to the side here. So mainly white, a little bit of yellow into this, keep it warm. So again, a lot of paint on the brush, a nice good roll of it. Hi Chuck, I just started painting and enjoy watching your videos to learn for inspiration. Do you tend to stick with just the Dagger striper brush, or do you vary the brush depending on the painting? I really like that brush. It's good for a wide variety of purposes, and I'll probably get into that brush in this painting as well. The only exception is when I'm looking for coverage. I just tend to like these angled flat brushes for processes like this, when just trying to get blocks of color on, and kind of just depends on the texture too. These patches of snow are just a little more conducive for this shape of brush, or this shape of brush is a little more conducive for that. And but I do have several brushes that I will use, and it all depends. I think that can kind of change with each painting. But I don't have a lot of brushes, but besides a liner brush for signing my paintings, and the Dagger striper brush is really versatile for when I'm getting into the fine-tuning part and specifics of a painting. These angled flat brushes are good for when you're kind of beginning something and you need to block something in, or if the texture works out right for it. I like the fan blender brushes, and I do have all these listed in most of the videos in the description below, or a link to the list of those. And those fan blender brushes work great for when I'm working on big skies and trying to blend it out. So I do throw in different brushes, and, but I am a believer of you don't need as many as you're marketed to need. So this color is just kind of like an off-white. It's got a lot of warmth to it, so it's not quite yellow, not quite orange. Just kind of in between. Can you talk about how we might be able to enroll for your class? I just have the channel memberships for the YouTube here enabled, and with those memberships, you can find it in the join button below the video, or I think there's a little $ in the live chat that can get you it as well. But I take hundreds of photos. I think I haven't counted exactly, but we've got to be getting the road to 1,000 reference photos. I feel like we're starting to move in that direction. We're definitely over 500. They're photos that are edited by me, taken by me. A lot of beautiful places around Yellowstone and the mountains, and all the photos that I paint in the studies here are part of that. And so members get all these photos, as well as I stream the color mixing prior to the live streams. And then I just post generally extended versions of my time lapses. So the large paintings that I'm doing, you get 4 to 6 hour extended versions of those. Some additional videos as well, if there's parts that I can share that I wasn't able to get to. when I'm live streaming, things like that. Just generally just easier access to asking me questions. I see those questions from the members much more readily. So this color, which is still the snow, I'm thinking about reflective light, and it kind of existed here when I was here. It's got more warmth to it, so this is kind of just a very muted brown. Pretty bright. And the light that's shining down below here is kind of reflecting back up to the back side. And so this snow here, instead of more of a blue tone, it's going to be more of a warmth, more of a warm tone. Very slow process, but really do enjoy this. It's just very relaxing. I think blending, creating smooth blends in the sky, that might be one of the more stressful parts of a painting. When you can just get into thicker chunks of texture like this and have it be appropriate and what you're after, it's just such a more relaxing process. Starting to take shape though. You can see everything's starting to come together now. Really beautiful scene. I just knew right when I came into this little meadow right here, it was just something I had to paint at some point in time. I've been waiting on it for a while. It's fun to get into it. Alright, and then with that I'm going to go back into some of the blues and more tree detail to be had. Do I have plans for a Patreon channel? I do not. I don't think at this time I can manage that. That's a good question. I do get that question a lot. But just not comfortable yet with the amount of time I think that would require for me. I really hope the members can be just a good resource of tools that you can use in your process. I know photos are really hard to get, and I hope to just continue adding more video content there as well. Alright. So what I'm going to do now is, well, no, I lied. I'm going to fill in the canvas before I get any further. The panel here. We've got some sunlight. Down below. Just white and yellow here. White here. Ooh, that's a good question. Am I happy as an artist, or do I want to try new things and new styles? I feel like I've gone through a lot of that process. I feel very content with where I'm at, and the vision or the goal that I want to accomplish with my art. And I think that kind of goes back to how I moved away from commission work once I kind of felt like I had more of a clear vision of what I was after with my artwork. And so, although I do feel like I've gone through what you describe, I don't feel that as much anymore. I feel like I have a very clear vision of what I'm trying to do, and that keeps me very content with my current processes and what I'm painting and how. So no, I don't think right now, but I have any, I think I'm very content and happy with what I'm doing right now. But that's not to say that couldn't change, because it's definitely changed in the past. So I'm adding some orange and yellow to this. But that's a good question. I think I've felt that way, where I've just not been happy with where I'm at. I feel like I went through years of that, and especially in recent years. And I know that I've, in times past here recently, in the last couple of years, I've stepped away from doing a lot of the YouTube videos that I used to do, and I think maybe because of that reason, just knowing that I just wasn't where I wanted to be and not doing what I wanted to do. And then I think just creating more for YouTube and social media, just talking about more of my process lately, I think that's indicative of me finally feeling like I'm satisfied and very content with what I'm doing and where I'm at, and So that's probably why I've been posting more and talking more about some of my processes. Is I do feel happy now, where I'm the direction in which I'm going with my work. If that makes sense. It's a great question. So when I'm not happy with where I'm at or what I'm doing with my art, I feel like that's where I just get consumed by that, and that's when I lock myself in a bedroom and work on that and try to resolve that. And that's when I do a lot less talking, especially online. Wow, I really like the way the snow is coming in here. So I'm just thinking about the light coming through now and contacting the snow down below here. Okay. Continue working at that snow. So now I'm thinking about just the edges here. How do you kind of blend this together? Tie it together. So I'm kind of mixing a color that is somewhat in between. Some of the highlights here. And then just lightening up some of the blue as well as I go through this. And again, all of this remains wet, so allows me to just easily continue to blend it together, work it into itself. The paint just kind of, some of those highlights just get picked up into the brush, and that's fine. That just kind of all blends together, keeps things cohesive, flowing together. Everything just kind of merges into itself, into the next object. A lot of complexity in this scene overall. I just feel like it just takes forever to just get from one spot to the next and feel like I'm happy with that. But again, just really relaxing process. I just love working the paint like this. thank you for everyone who's left a comment. If I haven't responded to it, I really appreciate it. I try to kind of read them as they come through. K Brooks, really enjoying this. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoy this. Thank you. Again, I hope to make this more of a regular thing. It really helps me in my process to just kind of work through ideas. I get very stuck in just kind of the tunnel vision of working on some of the larger pieces that you forget how important it is to just finish things, and just the act of just doing these smaller, more so studies, and just really helps me in my process, and it's fun to share. Hopefully now, as these details start to come in, it really starts to make sense and come to life. Let's see, and then some of the color that I had initially, that some of that starts to just get left behind, and starts to all make sense. And I think that's the benefit of getting full coverage at the beginning, and not worrying about specifics of the color you're adding. It's just in the realm, in the vicinity of the colors you're after. Just, and then when you layer over the top, it just all starts to work in harmony. Okay, I'm gonna pick up some more white. Kind of just a blend of these colors. wash the brush again and get into some of the area over to the right here. I haven't really gotten to yet. Pick up some of this nice bright golden color and just start thinking about some of the light bouncing back in here as well. Regarding the wall work and work but come up short, then you have to break through. What is your most recent personal breakthrough? For example, maybe a new way you illustrate feathers and the ducks. Yeah, so you feel like you hit a wall and then you have to work through that, and then you feel like you've discovered something, perhaps. That's a good question. I think I gotta think about that one. I think that probably... I feel like lately, as I've been working on some of the colorful skies that I do, I think getting myself to try and accomplish so with the skies, and especially this darker painting I've been working on with the wolves and the twilight and the colors in the sky, I used to want to, I just would automatically think that I needed to layer my way to feeling like I was happy with painting something that to me seems very difficult. But I think, and that was always a big hurdle. It's something that I felt that was a wall, so to speak, because I never felt like I had control of it. It was something that I stumbled my way towards the finish, I felt oftentimes. And as I got into painting and working with more wet paint and challenging myself to finish things in a single layer before moving on to the next object or part of the painting, I think through several paintings, many different processes, I think I've learned for myself that I can accomplish big tasks like that colorful sky by just going for it. And even though when I feel like as I'm doing that, I don't have the confidence in knowing if it's going to turn out right. But the breakthrough, so to speak, is me lately feeling like by just going for it anyways, that I actually discover that I can do it and accomplish what I hope to accomplish. And then that kind of allows me to do it more effectively and perhaps quicker. But I also think it turns out better because it's really hard to mimic the flow of paint that was executed when it's all wet and all of it sort of speaks together and flows together in a certain way. And I think that was kind of a breakthrough for me recently, especially when it comes to the large areas like a colorful sky in a painting. And just made me more comfortable going for it, and I feel like they've been coming out more how I was hoping they would. So I think that's a recent breakthrough. So lots of little highlights. So I'm just grabbing these golden colors, a little brighter than what's on already, and kind of just like the pine boughs in and around the snow. Okay, I'm going to wash my brush once again. Oh yeah, do I have any suggestions for painting the vermiculation and waterfall feathers such as widgeon, green-winged teal, or pintail? I think I'm pulling it off, but it's very tedious. I haven't pulled my hair out yet. Yeah, I know exactly where you're at. That's funny you say that. I actually, my entry, which surprisingly won the California duck stamp back in 2015, you'll see that the green wing teal with a lot of those patterns on the side, they're so difficult. I actually go through this process of just back and forth trial and error, and much in the same way that I paint through these areas like this. I'll start by just painting the color of, say, what's in between all of the stripes, the striping. And then while the paint is still wet, I go in with a fine brush. I like to use the Dagger Striper brush, and just because it can hold a lot of paint, can really get a good load, and it allows you to keep the lines going for longer without having to kind of go back to the palette. So I'm just picking up this darker color. It's a little darker than the red through here, and that's going to start to add another layer of depth of shadows. And I think that was a good example, because that's the last time I feel like I really ran into what you're talking about with waterfowl. And so I'd go through my first pass and add those lines in while the paint was still wet. But of course, a lot of it comes out, a lot of it blends together, kind of comes out muddy. But a lot of it was looking good, and I think if you're using oils and painting wet and wet like that, it takes a lot of time, but just trying to work it as far as you can get it before it dries. And then what I did was I just kind of left it, and then once it dried, I'd go back in and tediously try to correct anything that didn't look right. So a lot of it maybe blended together in parts, or lines got messy, and I would go back in with the color of what's in between all of that striping, and I'd try to clean and fine-tune the light areas, and then I'd go back in and clean and fine-tune the actual stripes, and then just repeated that process through 3 or 4 layers of paint. And eventually I felt like I stumbled on what I was left with, and I think that painting's a good example of one where I felt like I really nailed it. That's the best way that I can describe it. It is tough. Getting back into some of the reds, and I'm just going to try and blend some of this together. So as I move closer, I'm moving more into some reds. So I'm picking these reds back up in this mixture as I work closer to the sunlight. Which artist inspires you? I actually answered that question earlier in the video, but artists that really inspire me are ones that really share stories and in and around the things I love in life, which of course is the outdoors. And so I really loved Terry Redlin when I was a kid growing up, and that was somebody who really inspired me, and some other wildlife artists as well, the Hartman brothers, and I've always wanted to accomplish what they did, but in my own words, or in my own language, so to speak. Capture my own experiences in a way that conveys the story, similar to what they did. That was inspiring for me. These areas back here, now I'm confident going back in, and I'm taking these dark colors and just going back in and around the snow, adding some of these dark colors. Hey Chuck, when are you going to do the rims in Billings, Montana? I think you could nail it. There are some beautiful locations through there. I used to live in Billings once upon a time. So I've been to all those fantastic spots. Yeah, there are some great areas. At some point, but I'm more interested in some of the breaks and Badlands. I also used to live I lived in Medora, North Dakota for a long period of time. Most of my time after college, I lived there, and I have a real love for the Badlands. And it's just funny though, I was always working and just never really created much around it. It's just a different time. But I do like that country, and especially around central Montana for sure. But I really want to get a little further north and paint some scenes. I want to spend more time up in the breaks and start getting some inspiration from that part of the country. Okay, so still taking this dark color, continuing around, and just darkening some of the areas. A lot of these spots are just not as dark as I wanted them to be, and now it's just a good time to go in between and just start to get those shadows. And if you leave some of that color from the initial pass, that's fine. Come to Wisconsin. So beautiful here. I know Wisconsin well. I spent most of my childhood going to our family cabin in Amory, Wisconsin, and I've spent a lot of time in different parts of Wisconsin. My best friend lives down in southeastern Minnesota and that whole Driftless Plateau area. I just love southwest Wisconsin. The northern parts, I mean, I know exactly what you're saying. There's so many beautiful spots. So I'm bouncing around with this color just in the same way that I did with the snow. So I'm not sticking to one spot. I'm working my way across and building my way towards where I feel like I've got enough. And this kind of just prevents me from overdoing it. Some of this area that I'm working through starts to get tighter, and that's where the brush starts to feel limiting, where that dagger brush I'd probably have a little bit easier time with some of these spots. Some of that red and kind of got there's like a very hard line right here, and just kind of soften that up, add some red back in, so you can always go back and forth, and things are just never stuck in one spot. You can always make a change. Just adding small textures. Okay, so I think it's time to step away from this brush for right now, and I'm going to pick up the Dagger Striper brush. And some of the things that I'd like to capture is the light coming through, and it's just going to be different places where I just want some of that light shining through, and as well as just starting to add some smaller textures, and that's what's going to really add more life, some interesting things in the shadows. So I'll continue to go here for about another 15 minutes, let's say, and I'm definitely getting to a point where if I just kind of stand back, painting has just come together beautifully. I'm really happy with it, and I always feel like it's good at this time to step away from it and go do something else. I've got other things to do that do that, and then when I come back, I feel like I have a different perspective, and that's when I can really take things to the place where I really wanted them to go. So I'll probably come back and work on a few things later. I think the last live stream that I did, as soon as I got up and started walking around and looking at it, there was just things about it that I was like, are you serious? I didn't have that dark enough, and just kind of judging myself based on some of the reference that I took and had, and I was like, I thought that was much darker than that, and it's just so easy to get tunnel vision sitting down and completing a painting in one session. And it's just so good to take a step back. Small pine tree right here. And then just kind of take that color. I'm going to add some red to it for fun. And start adding some details. Yeah, that tree in front is leaning. I'm actually wanting to make that tree not look so big. And my intent was to bring some of the snow here. See, these are the things that you start to lose track of as you get working. My intent was to use some snow back here on other trees to not make it look like it's going so far up this way. then also just wanting more branching down here. And there's just more things that need to be worked on in the sky, perhaps. More blue and white. So just a lot of bouncing around at this point. Hi Chuck, I second the question about achieving a more loose, painterly style. I am constantly torn between wanting realism but also wanting a looser, dreamier look. How do you find your own style? It's a really good question. Difficult question to answer. I think that takes time. And I think it takes the willingness of trying different things and not ever feeling like you're stuck with your current methods. And I think oftentimes that comes down to just going for certain things, even if you don't have an idea of how that's going to turn out. I just think that I can, just speaking from my own personal journeys and all of that, finding a style that you like and what you really want has never been something that I feel like I've been able to solve in the moment. It's always something I can look back on and just realize, oh, that led me to this, and that's why I ended up doing this a certain way. I think so much of that is individual, and I think so much of that is a something that is difficult to plan, and a lot of times it just takes getting into it, and I think that's one of the major challenges with painting is it's a very frustrating process that takes many years to feel like you're happy with where you're at. So I would just keep going, and I think though a lot of the breakthroughs and changes that I've made in my own work have come through just the unknown of not being sure how something is going to come out, but just going forward anyways. And yeah, I don't know. I hope that helped answer that a little bit. So I'm going to have some highlights on some of these. So this is what I'm going to work on. And this is going to take a long time. It's a process that I think is difficult to share all at once, because I think what it requires is me stepping back and walking around, looking at the painting from different angles. But adding some highlights and just definition to some of these things. Go back to this larger brush here. I think I could work a lot on the snow, but I don't want to get too much detail with this. It has a certain look right now that I really enjoy, so I don't want to ruin that. But things like the highlights, there's certain things that I do want to touch on and work on a little more. At this point, it's all about refining the paint. Probably won't look to do a lot beyond adding highlights where I feel like I need to add highlights, and potentially adding some darker shadows. But aside from that, a lot of it's just manipulating the paint that's kind of already on the canvas. Certain things, these trees right here don't really have any shadows. That's why I like this dagger brush at this point. Just allows me to go in between a lot of this work very carefully. The treetops is something I'm going to want to work on a little more as well. Just adjusting some of the color up here. So we'll just kind of work at these treetops, and then I think after that I'm going to just kind of call it there, take a break, and see what I think maybe later in the day. This will stay wet for hours. It's reworkable for a long time. Beautiful. So there's just a lot that can continue to be done with this one. And I think that's just a personal choice at this point. But there's a few things that I do want to work on, but man, we're getting close. It'd be fun to add a little more, some of the details up close. A few things like a couple pieces of grass or sticks, bushes coming out. And just small highlights. And again, I think it's really gonna look good to add just more highlights and perhaps just some more detail right around the sun also. That's something that can really get time consuming. But this is where I like to add the thicker splotches of paint. think one thing I could do to finish it up is, never did brighten the sky yet. That's something that I will do here. Wash the brush and pick up some pure white. And I'm going to take this pure white a few places here. I'm going to just lay it on pretty thick. Some of the top sides of the snow over here, kind of have that in the opposite direction, that reflective light of the sky. So some blues. And wash my brush. And let's go ahead and take some of the yellow. This is just yellow and white. Pick up some white, make it more bright. More yellow. I almost forgot to do this. Brighten that sun. Just ever so softly, using the long side of the brush, just blending it up. There can be imperfections, that's okay. Light bounces around a lot. Can even kind of start to look like sun rays or something like that. Oof. Definitely what I needed. Very softly, and that paint underneath is just a little wet. Probably have something right here, just a piece of something. That's all right. Really bright yellow, mixing in with some of the orange. Okay. Wash it really nice. Get that kind of cleaned off. And pick up the pure white. Just try to fan it into some of these colors. Beautiful. Love it. Nice thick paint. That thick opaque paint is just going to shine nice and bright. Good for highlights. All right. Perfect. So I think for right now I'm gonna serious this time. I'm gonna step aside and maybe a little more work at that. There's various things that I could clean up, but as a whole I think demonstrates pretty well kind of how I'm gonna get here with this one, and I think it's lovely as is. So thank you all for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this process. And thank you for all the questions. Sorry if I didn't get to any of those. Again, my reference I share with the channel members. Color mixing I share with the channel members as well before going live on the channel. And until next time, thank you everybody for joining me. Happy painting, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. We will see you in the next one, and I'm going to call it there. Again, I'll probably touch on some things later on today and kind of critique my work and continue to work it. But for now, I think that's it. So thanks again. We'll see you next time.